Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with FinanceAndLiberty.com, and this is the first in a series of panel discussions reviewing top Hollywood movies dealing with the world of finance and liberty. We will discuss how Hollywood portrays truth and untruth about our financial system and threats to our liberty. With us today is Mike Rivero, a peace activist and radio show host from Hawaii. He is the founder of WhatReallyHappened.com. Mike has also worked in the film industry, working on such movies as Star Trek, The Day After Tomorrow, and has supervised visual effects on Brain Scan, Lost, and Hawaii Five-0. And also joining us today is independent filmmaker and movie critic Josiah Johnson. Josiah Johnson has his own movie review show on YouTube, youtube.com/worthwatchingmovies. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Nice to be here.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so the movie we're reviewing today is Wall Street from 1987, starring Charlie Sheen and Michael Douglas. Starting with Josiah, can you lay out for our viewers the plot of the movie?
Sure. So essentially, the movie revolves around this Wall Street stockbroker named Bud Fox, who's brought up in a blue-collar family. His dad works repairing airplanes for an airline. And essentially, he is a stockbroker on Wall Street. And he's really getting tired of his life as a stockbroker. He's sick of always having to run around answering the phones, making the trades for people. His dream is to be on the other end of the line, on the people who are actually putting up the money to make the trades, to be powerful and successful. His dream way of getting there is to work with this very successful broker named Gordon Gekko, who owns a lot of stocks, makes huge trades, and just makes tons of money on every single time he does it. Now, luckily for Bud Fox, he actually is able to make a deal with Gordon Gekko. He provides to him some very good advice, gets him a few good trades, and gets in the door and gets himself into that sort of higher end world. He very soon finds out though that it's a world of crazy politics and of greed, shady business deals and things like that are not exactly what he's planning on getting into, and he sort of gets swept into it and gets into a lot of trouble along the way. Some of it involving his father, his family, things like that, and his friends, of course, at his broker agency. So that's kind of that sets the stage for really the essential plot of the movie.
All right, so now turning to Mike, how does Hollywood portray in this movie Wall Street, the truth about Wall Street?
Well, I think we need to take a step back and understand that Oliver Stone's reputation is based on his making movies of people pretty much as they really are versus the sometimes glamorized, spun propaganda version that we'll get. And to pull back out of the financial center, probably if you're as old as I am and you remember the Vietnam era, you will remember Hollywood was cranking out movies like The Green Beret with John Wayne, where we're out there fighting for truth and justice there, Pilgrim, and showed the U.S. military as the good guys and taking care of everybody and just dealing with this horrible war. Then, of course, Oliver Stone came out with Platoon, which was a very gritty portrayal of what it was really like to be there. And obviously, anybody who was talking to the returning Vietnam veterans came to understand Oliver Stone was showing it far closer to what the reality was versus this very obvious John Wayne propaganda piece. And so I think that carries forward into Wall Street in that Oliver Stone really did get to the essence of what I call the money junkie mindset, where the goal is to make money and it doesn't really matter how. And certainly the Gordon Gekko character almost seems to be an archetype for the people that we do see on Wall Street who are there to make vast sums of money and really are oblivious to the damage they're causing to other people. We certainly saw a lot of that with Mitt Romney's financial maneuverings leading up to his failed presidential campaign of simply using the money to make more money and destroying companies and entire communities in the process. And I think Oliver Stone really did crystallize that kind of personality for the American audience, which is why the film really kind of resonated with much of the audience.
I think you brought up a really good point with the concept of a money junkie. In fact, there's the quote in the movie that Bud Fox says, Charlie Sheen's character, where he says, "How much is enough?" And he doesn't get an answer from Michael Douglas because nothing is enough at that point because he just wants more all the time.
Yeah, that very much is it. We see it with people like Bernie Madoff, who co-founded Nasdaq, and he had more money than any one person could spend in a lifetime, and yet he still went out and set up this Ponzi scheme that looted his investors out of $65 billion. It is an addiction, and we need to recognize it. And I want to draw a line here. I have no problem with people wanting to be rich. I'd like to be rich myself, but there's a proper way to do it. For example, James Cameron, who makes all these wonderful movies that we voluntarily give him our money in exchange for, or George Lucas, or Steve Jobs, who pioneered the Apple II, where we choose to give them our money and they become rich. That's what capitalism is about. But in Wall Street, we're seeing massive amounts of fraud, a government that will take no action against it, where they're making money and they're causing a huge amount of destruction in the community around them. That is addictive behavior. And it doesn't matter if it's money they're addicted to, or heroin they're addicted to, or meth they're addicted to. The behavior is still very much the same. And I remember that wonderful documentary that came out called Inside Job. It won the Academy Award for Best Documentary 2 years ago. And in it, they had a comment where they had actually wired up some of these Wall Street operators to brain scans, and discovered that every time they pulled off a really good deal, the part of the brain that lit up was the very same pleasure center that lights up when they do cocaine. And the documentary went on to explain that there's a huge amount of cocaine use on Wall Street. We're dealing with a class and category of people who are demonstrably mentally ill, but our society doesn't recognize it as being a problem. Just like we saw with the Bud Fox character, they want to be in there. We saw that again even with Bernie Madoff, where the SEC sent investigators over to investigate him because of Harry Markopoulos's evidence that fraud was going on. And instead, the SEC investigators handed in resumes. They wanted to join in. They wanted to be part of the party.
Do you see, Mike, that Wall Street has changed a lot since the 80s? What ways do you think Wall Street has changed since the movie Wall Street came out?
I don't think its behavior has changed very much. In fact, going into the 1990s, leading up to the mortgage-backed security fraud, I think it was sort of like, hey, if they're making movies about it, I guess it's now more socially acceptable. And if anything, it seems like the behavior has gotten more and more out of control. There was a magazine survey that was done on Wall Street earlier this year where 25% of the people they talked to said, yeah, we have to use fraud to stay in business. We have to use fraud to get ahead. If we're not committing fraud, then we're going to lose out against the other people in our company. And so it's kind of an open this is just the way that life is, and it is that Gordon Gekko mentality written across the entire financial industry.
Turning to Josiah, while you were watching the movie, did you see anything in the movie that parallels with what is happening in our financial system today?
Well, I think for sure, the movie is somewhat timeless in the fact that, albeit, elements of its aesthetics are very dated, but the concepts in the movie and the things that happen are very timeless in the fact that you're seeing these same issues, the SEC frauds, all of these different things happening today in exactly the same way that they transpire in the movie. You still have, as Mike put it, money junkies who are just desperately trying to get as much as possible, as quickly as possible, by any means necessary. That's still happening. Of course, Bernie Madoff was an excellent example of that. Thankfully, he was finally caught. I believe it was his own son who actually turned him in. But the concepts in this movie and the things that take place are definitely very, very much relevant today. And I think it's, it really holds up in that regard. And there are, even the character of Gordon Gekko, I think he may have seemed a little more extreme in the time that the movie came out. But when I was, watching the movie here the other day, I was thinking this is a completely realistic portrayal. This is the sort of person who you could walk into anywhere and meet any day, just based on the fact of who he was and the way he was acting. You see people like that on a daily basis today as well.
And speaking of the character Gordon Gekko, in the movie he often makes his money through collapsing different businesses and leaving thousands of people out of work. Today we're seeing layoffs and high unemployment, companies going bankrupt. I guess turning to Mike, the economic crisis that we're in today, do you see this as partly caused by people similar to the character of Gekko?
Well, moving to the sequel movie, Wall Street Money Never Sleeps, Gordon Gekko's out of prison. He's on a book tour promoting his book, and he gets up on the podium and he says, greed is not only good, now it's perfectly legal. And he is right, because much of what we're seeing today is a direct result in 1999, the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which had been passed in the wake of the Great Depression to keep private investment banks and depositor banks separate in order to protect depositors' money. With the repeal of Glass-Steagall, the financial firms went back to the same kind of reckless behavior that led to the Depression of the 1930s. And it's very much clear at this point that fraud is not only socially acceptable on Wall Street, the government has completely abandoned even the pretense of trying to keep this system under control because, unfortunately, too many members of Congress are invested with those same Wall Street firms. And they're all just happy to be money junkies together.
Gordon Gekko stated in the movie that we make the rules. You're not naive enough to think that we're living in a democracy, are you? So starting with Mike, do you see that Wall Street at least partly runs our country today?
Yeah, it runs it to a very extraordinary extent. We know that over the years, laws that restricted the influence of money in politics have been rescinded. Certainly the Citizens United decision completely reshaped the media landscape to whoever's got the most money is going to get the message out there. The money really does run it all. And remember that famous quote from one of the founders of the Rothschild banking system: "Give me control of a nation's money and I care not who makes the laws." Because ultimately, money is sort of a solidified form of power. And whoever's got that power is going to use it to get more money and more power. We see how money completely dominates our political process. We know that there's massive amounts of election fraud, which is obviously funded by somebody's money. And I do think money has come to control our society to a very unhealthy regard. And when you have money controlling a society, it's no longer a democracy. It's no longer a republic. It is a fascist economic dictatorship. And I really do see the signs that that's where the United States is right now.
So out of all the people living in America, does anybody really understand, as you're saying, we're not really a democracy anymore, that Wall Street really runs the show?
They exert a huge amount of influence. Wall Street financial corporations are some of the largest political donors to every campaign. I know a lot of people are always screaming about AIPAC and other pro-Israel lobbies, how much money they give to members of Congress. But compared to Wall Street, Israel's campaign donations are really rather minor. And those members of Congress, they are the finest government that money can buy. And right now, Wall Street's got the most money.
Turning to Josiah, in the movie, Bud Fox's character seems to think that cheating doesn't really cause any harm and that he can use insider information to bet on stocks. I know we were talking before the interview, and this actually doesn't turn out to be the case. Using insider information to trade stocks can actually be very harmful, and this is actually shown in the movie.
Well, I would say, definitely, if you look at, I think it was meant to be taken, definitely the movie is one of those quotes where you hear it and you go, that doesn't quite square with reality. I think, that's the fact is that, on the surface, if you're in that position, you think, well, all I'm doing is I'm just using some information I got. Other people don't know it, but I do just some little insider information, going to make a little money with this trade. It's not going to hurt anyone. But that's really not the case in the fact that, you're affecting not only the other people who are owning the shares who would buy or sell, you're negatively affecting them sometimes. And also, as you see in the movie, a lot of this information can be used quite harmfully, and it can lose people jobs. It can lay off, and if a company gets absorbed, things like that can lay off entire, thousands of people based on what trades happen due to the insider information.
Would you agree with that, Mike?
Absolutely, because for every financial transaction, for somebody to win, somebody else must lose. The way Wall Street is set up, there's a single large winner, and they hope the losses are spread over so many people and so many companies that it wouldn't be noticed. But when you have pretty much the entire financial industry playing these games, the cumulative effect is, very much it is harming the entire society. I wrote an article on my website about the flaws in America's financial theory, and one of them I put in there was that this obsession with playing financial games, not only is it concentrating all the wealth in Wall Street and away from the American public, but there are necessary sectors of our economy that are simply starved for funding because they don't generate a high enough return. They don't generate the adrenaline. Wall Street really is a giant open-air gambling casino, and everything is committed into just getting the game going. They seek volatility. They seek high risks for its high gain, and that has led to some extraordinarily reckless decisions, like the selling of some $90 trillion worth of credit default swaps against Europe's debt, which means that when Europe implodes, Wall Street gets sucked down into the vortex with it. Of course, they'll turn around and say, we need another bailout from the taxpayers. But I, I don't think the American people have $90 trillion just lying around right now.
I wanted to move our focus to a quote that was at the very beginning of the movie. Hal Holbrook's character makes an interesting insight in the movie. He said, "Too much cheap money sloshing around in the world. The worst mistake we ever made was letting Nixon get us off the gold standard." So I guess starting with Mike, how did severing the dollar's tie to gold change Wall Street?
Well, it not only changed Wall Street, it changed the entire world because at the end of World War II, the major financial powers signed an agreement called the Bretton Woods Agreement, which made the dollar the international trade and reserve currency. Prior to that, it had been the British pound. And the other nations went along with this on two conditions. One is that the U.S. dollar would be redeemable in gold for $35 an ounce. And the second condition was that the U.S. would refrain from overprinting the dollars and using the Bretton Woods obligation to have other countries send us goods and agricultural produce and products for little more than ink and paper. And when France notified the United States that they were going to redeem this huge pile of Federal Reserve dollars they had in their vaults for gold at $35 an ounce, Nixon really didn't have much choice because the Federal Reserve had been overprinting those dollars and there wasn't enough gold there to redeem them. So they ended gold convertibility. They've been trying to prop up the dollar with the petrodollar since then. And it's not only harmed the United States of America, it pretty much harmed the whole world because while the Federal Reserve and its owners were just pouring in ink and paper, they were in exchange for it getting vast amounts of real products to sell, agricultural imports, and it was a system of basically looting the entire world post-World War II using those Federal Reserve notes. And the Hal Holbrook character is absolutely right. We should have kept the U.S. dollar shackled to some unit of value. Maybe there wasn't enough gold. Maybe we should have gone back to silver. But for the private central banks, which basically operate licensed counterfeiting operations, they don't want the money tied to anything of tangible value because that limits their ability to simply print up new money and play with it as much as they want. And right now, the entire system is literally addicted to all this instantly created money, $85 billion a month that is being used to paper over Wall Street's losses. And it's all a confidence game right now at this point. But Hal Holbrook is absolutely right because the money was out there and available so freely that people were engaging in very, very reckless speculation and investment. And then every time it fell apart, the losses were transferred to the American people through TARP and bailouts and quantitative easing. And that, too, is a hallmark of a fascist economic dictatorship. When somebody makes money, they're allowed to keep it. When somebody loses money, the losses are transferred onto the people. And that's what's been going on in this country till the point where the people just don't have anything left.
And speaking of the gold standard, getting off the gold standard has really made possible the huge debt that the U.S. has run up through the years. Gordon Gekko discussed in the movie, quote, "America's trade deficit and fiscal deficit are at nightmare proportions." So, Mike, do you think Gekko was correct? And if so, doesn't that mean that America's deficits are a nightmare of even greater proportions today, with both our trade deficits and fiscal deficit clocking in at around 5 times what they were in 1985?
Easily. And the fact of the matter is we don't actually know what the government debt is. They're still sort of arguing over that $16 trillion mark. But other economists have looked at the situation and said when you include all the off-books obligations, such as all the money that the government has borrowed from Social Security and cannot pay back, the total federal government debt is somewhere around $74 trillion. There was an article on National Public Radio said it's actually over $200 trillion. Nobody really knows because it's all being lied about, like the unemployment figures. Now, the trade deficit is actually a somewhat different case. Because over the last 30 years, America has kind of abandoned its former greatness as a manufacturing power, and certainly other countries don't want to buy our agricultural exports because of the failed experiment with GMO. But what happened is the financial system got so dependent on making money through playing money games that they just said, we don't need to bother with manufacturing and the rest of it. We got so much money, we can import everything that we want. And the trade deficit is the result of a country of people who need cars, appliances, food, and so forth. But at the same time, they've pretty much lost the ability to make what they need, and that's why our trade balance is something like almost $2 billion a day now.
All right, so to wrap up, starting with Josiah, how did you like the movie in general as a movie?
Well, I think it's definitely a quality movie, and like I said, I feel like it really stands the test of time. Definitely the story does. A lot of the concepts do. I think the acting in it is fantastic. Charlie Sheen plays a great job, and it was really great to see Martin Sheen actually playing his real-life son's father in the movie. That was a really interesting thing that you don't get to see a lot in movies. And I thought it was done really well in the movie. Martin Sheen's character is very likable, as sort of Charlie Sheen's blue-collar father who works at the airline. And then, of course, you have Michael Douglas playing Gordon Gekko. And I thought Michael Douglas was fantastic. He was equal parts likable but intimidating at the same time, where you meet him and you're like, he seems like a nice guy on the surface, but you can tell that just below that he's really dangerous. He's really menacing. There's something about him that you're not going to like later on. And I thought Michael Douglas just did a fantastic job portraying that. I thought all of the acting in the movies were great. It was great to see John McGinley in the movie, actually. He's been mostly a TV actor recently, but it was great to see him when he was younger in an actual movie. I was surprised to see him in it. I thought that the plot itself worked really well. The ending was left a little bit ambiguous for me. I usually tend to like things to be slightly more wrapped up at the end of a movie, but I mean, overall, I think the movie was a fantastic examination, really, of just the culture that surrounds Wall Street and the dangers that can happen when you get sucked into that, especially in the fact that, if you're playing these games, if you are working on the insider trades and all of these different things, that you're going to get hurt at some point. You're not just going to be able to step in, dabble for a little bit, and get out and be totally fine. Something bad is going to happen to you at some point, whether or not you like it, because it's easy and not easy out at that point. And that, the more money there is, the more corruption there is, and the more dangers go along with it.
All right, thank you, Josiah, for those insights. Now turning to Mike, how did you enjoy the movie?
Well, it's an excellent movie. I mean, before I was a peace activist, I worked in the film industry myself for 30 some odd years here. I feel we ought to mention both Hal Holbrook's character and Terrence Stamp, who portrayed financiers who were still trying to play the game by the rules, by ethical behavior, by following the standards. And of course, they wind up sort of on the outside at the very end. And I think Stone was trying to mark a transition or predict the transition that we were going to see after 1999, where the crooked and the corrupt really did take control of Wall Street away from those who were trying to run the financial business with some sense of social responsibility.
All right, Mike Rivero and Josiah Johnson, thank you so much for joining us today. I guess starting with Josiah, where can people find you online?
Well, I have a YouTube channel here at youtube.com/worthwatchingmovies. Me and my co-hosts, we go once a week to a new movie that's come out, review the new movie, let you know the big question, is it worth going to see in a theater? Is it worth watching? And then on Wednesdays, I also have a secondary show on the same channel called Worth Watching Wednesdays, where I review some of my personal favorite movies from times gone by.
All right, Mike, where can they find you?
My website is whatreallyhappened.com, and I also host a talk radio show at the Republic Broadcasting Network from 1 to 4 p.m. Central Time every Monday through Friday, and we will be live tomorrow for the holiday.
All right. Once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go to financeandliberty.com and subscribe for free for more interviews and financial insight.